Yarns with character. So, just like there are so many different fabrics, there are so many different types of yarns. And of course, there are always new yarns being created and invented and new technologies made to diversify and widen the whole world of yarns. But right now I'd like to go over a few specific types of yarns, some specialty yarns, some fun yarns that show up a lot and we should all be familiar with. Plied yarns. So plied yarns are two or more separate yarns that are twisted together. So single yarns are what we talked about in the first part of this lecture, where we just have fiber being spun into one filament. Plied yarns take two of those single yarns and twist them together. Yarns or textiles made with this type of yarn can be described as a number ply. The number represents how many single yarns were twisted together to make that yarn. For instance, here in a 2-ply, we have two single yarns that have been twisted together to make one yarn. Let's not get too confused with our terminology. So this is 2-ply, consisting of two single yarns. Then we go up. Here we have 3 single yarns that have been twisted together to give us a 3-ply. And then, of course, onward, 4 single yarns giving us a 4-ply. And of course, we can have many, many different plies. You can have as many different plies as you have a machine capable of spinning that many yarns together. So you want a 14-ply? Find a machine that'll do it and you can have it. Plied yarns are denser, smoother, and stronger than their single yarn counterpart. The fabrics they create are thus denser, smoother, and stronger. Plied silks have a lovely luster and a dramatic flow, drape, and movement. That is because, of course, with the added density, they're a bit heavier. So they have, although still being rather fine, because they have these sort of small condensed spaces, because they have these very still tight twists coming around. But with that added density and a little bit extra weight, it gives a little bit of heaviness, weight, and gravitas to the movement. Gorgeous, gorgeous flow, and very fluid and beautiful drape. Plied cottons are used when strength and durability are needed. Cords are multiple plied yarns twisted together. So in the plied yarns, you have single yarns twisted together. Then once you have a bunch of plied yarns, you can twist those together to make cords. Getting a little complicated, twisting things on twisting things. Cords can be quite large and decorative. They're often used as edging for pillows, and also in other accents of interior design. They're used in fashion as well as ties and piping to accent different lines or seams. You can actually weave or knit with cords. However, it's fairly rare. They're usually used on their own and don't tend to become other textiles. They just sort of are cords. This here is showing our progression from single strand to plied and then to cord. These, of course, are the single strands. These would be the plies, and then we twist them around to become cords. Slubbed yarns. Slubbed yarns are yarns that are not spun to be an even width. And here you can see that very clearly. Some parts are skinny, other parts are thicker, and some parts have slopes, which are soft, thick lumps called slopes. These slopes add texture and visual appeal. However, they're not terribly durable. Slubbed yarns are most typically seen in the crosswise or weft grain of the fabric, as lengthwise or warp yarns need to be strong because they are put under tension during the weaving process. Because slubbed yarns are not durable, they are prone to wear and pilling. As you can see, the slubs themselves are quite fuzzy. And remember that added fuzz always increases the risk of pilling in our fabric. This is an image of dupioni. Dupioni is a silk fabric that uses slubbed yarns. You can see the lovely crosswise striations it makes when woven in. Of course, we only see the striations in the crosswise grain because they are only used in the crosswise grain. Finer yarns, finer and stronger yarns, are used in the lengthwise direction. Here in the close-up, you can see one of the slubs creating an irregular raised bump in the dupioni fabric. Crepe yarns. Crepe yarns are spun using both S and Z twists in one yarn. Crepe yarns are made by spinning fiber in both clockwise and counterclockwise directions. The result is a yarn that kinks or doubles up when suspended. When looked at closely, one can see the waviness of the crepe yarns and the fabrics they create. So if we look closely here, these are crepe yarns. See how they kind of zigzag, they kind of kink around, they're sort of crooked and bouncy, they're not straight. So when we weave them, textiles using crepe yarns have a pebbled or crinkled texture. The wiggly shape of the crepe yarn gives the fabrics they create a bouncy and springy drape and feel. So if you scrunch it up, it easily springs back into shape. And added, they sort of bounce around with a fun, springy movement. Here is a close-up of a wool crepe. You can see the tiny little crepe yarns, and they don't go straight. They kind of angle every which way. They don't like to fall into nice right angles like we typically see in a woven fabric. Because they have this crooked texture, they're great at creating this pebbly, wavy texture. However, it reduces the luster of a fabric. Crepe fabrics are rarely shiny unless chemically treated. This is because that every which way direction of the yarns sort of breaks up the light, and so that harms them from being shiny. By necessity, crepe yarns are very tightly twisted, but they still create a limp and flowing fabric, which is interesting because high twist yarns usually make for stiff fabrics. Boucle and loop yarns. Boucle and loop yarns are made with small loops placed at intervals along the yarn. On the left, I have an image of a looped yarn, and here is an example of a boucle yarn. There is a subtle difference, but a lot of times their names can be used interchangeably. Use boucle if you want to sound fancy. Boucle and loop yarns are similar, and both feature little loops. Boucle yarns, like these ones over here, are thick 3-ply yarns. Their loops are produced by twisting 2 fine strands together with a thick strand that has been tightly twisted. Greater tension is applied to the finer strands, causing the thicker strand to double up and form these little loops. Boop, boop. Loop yarns, as seen over here on the left, have a core yarn, this guy right here, a loosely twisted strand with irregular loops, which is this guy right here, boop, 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 and a tightly twisted binder yarn that holds them all together. And that's this guy right here, sort of looping its way in around the other two. This is a close-up picture of a boucle fabric, and you can see the little loops in the face of the fabric created by that boucle yarn. Boucle fabrics are most often made from wool or acrylic fibers, but can be made from other fibers as well. The little loops give maximum texture and are fun to look at. However, the yarns are not very strong, and the little loops make the fabric easy to snag on things. So, imagine, you're covered with little tiny hooks. So, little tiny hooks trying to grab on to little tiny things every time you brush up against anything. So, don't wear your boucle when tending to your cactuses. Boucle yarns can be woven or knitted. They are often used to add texture to tweed fabrics. The surfaces of fabrics made with these yarns are always fuzzy and feature the little tiny loops, which make them easy to identify. Boucle fabrics are thick and spongy by nature, which doesn't gather well, but can enhance warmth and absorbency. Oof, sorry, I keep doing that. It is important to note that boucle fabrics don't always need to be made with boucle yarns. Weaving innovations have been made that allow for loops to be made during the weaving process. So instead of making a yarn with loops in it, you just take a regular yarn and make sure you add the loops during the weaving process. Chenille yarns are very fuzzy. So chenille yarns look like this over here. They have a furry texture with fuzzy pile yarns, these guys here, the fluffy bits, that are coming off two tightly twisted core yarns, these sort of yarns right in here. So chenille gets its name because it's French for caterpillar, and often caterpillars are quite fuzzy, and fuzzy caterpillars look an awful lot like chenille yarns. This is a caterpillar and not a chenille yarn, if you didn't know. Chenille fabrics are soft, fuzzy, and thick. They are wonderful to touch, very comforting and soft, furry, and can be very absorbent. Chenille yarns can be knit or woven. Super chunky varieties, like this one seen over here, are popular with home knitters and can create some incredibly fluffy sweaters, blanket, and scarves. Now, although they are most often seen in the home knitting scene, you can also use them commercially, but most often they're seen with sort of interior designs with blankets and things like that, or sometimes scarves. Chenille yarns are very absorbent due to their fluffy texture, and so have been very popular choices for bathrobes, towels, etc. Their soft feel also makes them great for furniture upholstery. The soft fuzzy pile of the chenille yarn is prone to wear over time though. The pile can wear away, shedding its fluff over time. This can make chenille fabrics very linty and not terribly long-lasting. Here we see a nice little chenille knit in action. The little fluffy bits coming out. Novelty yarns. There are many different kinds of specialty yarns with a wide range of attributes. They can be called or lumped together in a category called novelty yarns. They each have their own unique properties. And of course, new yarn types are coming out all the time with different characteristics, both for hobby knitting and for commercial purposes. Here we can see just some of the different types of novelty yarns out on the market today. We have this crazy go nuts yarn. This is actually one yarn. It's not a bunch of yarns together. It is one continuous yarn, but it has knots and braids and very large slubs and changes from tight twisting to loose twisting for this, just maximum texture feeling. So if you want something with a lot of fluff and a lot of texture, man, you'd get it out of this, that's for sure. Now, yarns can also be spun with metallic fibers. Now, metal cannot be spun on its own. So whenever you see something like this, when it's a metallic yarn, it's not 100% metallic yarn. It can't really be spun like that, not like all the other fibers we've talked about. Otherwise, I would have mentioned it in our first video on our fibers. However, parts or metallic fibers can be blended in with other fibers that we do make yarns out of, whether it be cotton, or typically it's synthetic nowadays, but it can be incorporated in and to a high enough degree that we get this lovely sort of glittery, metallic, shiny quality out of the yarn. And of course, we can do lots of different things, make them feathery, tie off other little bits, twist together different sized yarns, twist yarns to have different sort of furry things coming off. We can do all sorts of different things to our yarns to achieve different textures, different visual aspects, so on and so forth. So it's a wide, fun world of yarns out there, and hopefully you know a little bit more about the types of yarns that create special characteristics of our fabrics.